A very good evening, a warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, and welcome to what is a really cool opportunity for Dan Really Likes Wine. Normally we talk about South African wine and South African winemakers. We do have a fair number of international wine and winemakers on the show, but today we've got a very special guest coming up who, just to be on the show, flew in all the way from California. There was the small issue of a Stellenbosch wine event and a Cabernet Sauvignon conference to attend as well. But deep down, it was really the opportunity to join Dan Really Likes Wine. And we are very happy to have not just a renowned American Cabernet Sauvignon expert on the show today, but also a couple of locals who know a fair bit about the grape as well. It's always a big challenge for South Africa. It's one we talk about at the show on a regular basis. What should we be making? Because there is so much across South Africa that we do extremely well, and the winemakers frequently have to decide, well, there are 27 different things I could be making. How did I pare that down to something remotely manageable? Unless, of course, you're somebody like Peter Volser, in which case you just make absolutely everything all of the time, and then some more on top of that. It's a really cool opportunity then. Cabernet Sauvignon has been spoken about a lot, particularly over the last few winter months when it has not just been enjoyed, but appreciated as well for the quality of the wine we're producing. And I suspect from our South African guests today, we might get a word or two on some subtle changes in some of the broader styles to our interpretation of Cabernet Sauvignon, and how the elegance and power are coming together, I think, as well as ever, if not even better. So that's coming up on Dan Really Likes Wine today with Norman Goodfellows, a Cabernet Sauvignon celebration, taking in not just Stellenbosch, but also the United States as well. And I'm fascinated to see how the two stack up. Before I meet our superstar guest, though, and our South Africans to join him, let's have a quick look at this week's wine news. Starting with some stuff for the diary, the Cape Winemakers Guild auction is on the horizon. That means the tastings are even closer. They kick off in the Cape, make their way up to Pretoria and Johannesburg, including one of the better braais you will ever beat at. That is happening in Pretoria. A chance to taste the wines which in themselves will be a real treat, the very best of the guild, but also the opportunity to get a sense of what you might want to bid for should you be participating in the auction. And that's the first weekend in August, end of September, that last weekend they're in. So if you haven't got tickets yet, they do tend to sell out, so grab them quickly, and your chance with Nedbank and the Cape Winemakers Guild to try some very good South African wine. Also, the chance to try the wine of Mont Rochelle. That is coming up in the next few weeks. The opportunity to meet the team behind one of the iconic Franschhoek brands. It's a beautiful spot, lovely hotel, great grounds. I've had some terrific meals there over the years, but they also make some really good wine. Wine you've heard of and like, well, obviously you want to be there. Wine you've never heard of, well, you also want to be there to go and discover it and find out a bit more about it. Tickets available through Norman Goodfellows. Get hold of them through their website. There is a small contribution to make. That contribution goes to charity, and you get to have a really good night out, some terrific wine, and walk away usually with wine at great prices as well. And that is at the Norman Goodfellows in 4 ways. Again, tickets are limited, so get in early. And then our Dan Really Likes Wine monthly selection. If you haven't signed up yet, your chance to do so. 12 different wines. I've chosen them all myself, 6 red, 6 white. You can get just the white case, just the red case, or both. It focuses on wines that are vintage, wines that are rare, wines that are smaller producers, wines that have got a really cool story to them. You'll find, if you were part of the opening salvo, some wine from Oldenburg. There's a hint of who's coming up on the show this week. Their 2017 Cabernet Franc, glorious wine. There are different wines every month. There's a story behind them and a chance to explore stuff you probably won't have come across or know terribly well. So sign up, join the Dan Really Likes Wine selection, and I think, in fact, I'm pretty confident you'll have a really cool wine treat headed your way. Right, on to enjoyment of a grape that's very popular in the Nickel household. In fact, my Cabernet Sauvignon stocks are regularly depleted because my very thirsty wife, moment I'm traveling, gets hold of the key to the cellar, somehow hacks her way through the security systems I put in place to keep her out, and goes straight for the Cabernet Sauvignon. Why not? because the South African Cabernet Sauvignon that largely makes up that corner of the cellar tends to come in turn largely from Stellenbosch, and it really is around the world one of the great sites of Cabernet Sauvignon. So let's dive into it. We've got two very cool South African guests with us. One of them is the new chair of the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective, and she's very excited about this. One of them is the man in charge at Oldenburg, as I suggested. And the other has come all the way in from America just to be part of today's show. Guys, a very, very warm welcome. Lovely to have all of you joining us on Dan Really Likes Wine today. To Nic van Aarde, to our new chair, Deidre Taylor, and most importantly, David Bowman. We're really, really excited to have you on the show. And thank you very much for coming over and for being part of what's a very, very special time of the year in South Africa, especially for Stellenbosch. And one I suspect, David, you didn't need too much persuasion to join, because as a Cabernet Sauvignon lover, to come over to South Africa, to come over to Stellenbosch in particular, and to hang out in the Cape Winelands was one I suspect you agreed to do quite readily, David.
Very quickly. The answer was very immediate. It's a region that I've wanted to visit for a number of years, having done a lot of work in other parts of the world. Spain, Italy, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand. I never had the excuse to come to the Stellenbosch, but I appreciated the wines for quite a long time. And when I heard how this organization was really trying to make an impression on the world of wine with Cabernet Sauvignon, it seemed like a great opportunity to come learn, taste, and offer as much advice as I could to help them in that endeavor.
Cabernet Sauvignon is clearly something that's got under your skin. The Cabernet Sauvignon of Napa Valley is one we look on from this part of the world, something we admire and have certainly enjoyed over the years. Tell me about this love of Cabernet Sauvignon, David. What is it about this grape that has found its way into your heart and become such a big part of you?
Well, I've been in the wine industry and worked for some outstanding organizations for over 25 years, sometimes doing imported wine as well as doing exported wine, managing exports in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and so on. But the grape that seems to translate best around the world because of its unique position as a food pairing, because of its elegance and its age-worthiness, is certainly Cabernet Sauvignon. And the interesting thing is, I think certainly Napa Valley was seminal in putting the grape on the map in the United States as a New World origin for Cabernet Sauvignon. There are now multiple regions in the United States that are making world-class Cabernet Sauvignon. And I presently work for a company that actually is very invested in Washington, so in the far northwest part of the United States. Long tradition making Bordeaux varieties, exceptional Cabernet Sauvignon, as well as Southern California, places like Paso Robles. So I think it's actually very exciting that the Stellenbosch has decided to focus on this being one of the signature grapes that they're really putting a great effort against viticulturally in the cellar and in marketing to make an impact in the world of wine. And Cabernet becomes obsessive. Because you can collect, because it evolves in the bottle over decades, because of the strength, power, finesse, and because of the way it interacts with food, it's hard not to get a little bit obsessed with a grape.
Deidre, this is a special time for Stellenbosch. If we put it in American terms, given our guest, this is deciding to have an American football program and bringing Tom Brady over for the week to come and hang out with everybody. How special has it been to have David join us and share the knowledge and experience and global perspective on Cabernet Sauvignon with the Stellenbosch Cab community?
Indeed, it has been an amazing opportunity to have him come across and spend some time with us. It was the first ever CAB conference that was held in Stellenbosch this past Monday. And what I really enjoyed about the information shared, it wasn't just sort of high level MBA kind of stuff of, this is what you should be aiming for, but some real practical examples and and also some points of successes of where Stellenbosch can pitch itself, why it's relevant in that space, and real points on my agenda that I can take up with various importers as to why Stellenbosch Cab needs to be a part of their portfolio. So I think indeed, exciting times for us. We've got a lot of work ahead. But already it's the fact that Stellenbosch is championing something and working together with something has got a lot of appeal from a lot of markets. And we've seen a number of really good wine press also write articles about the association and about the region and about the variety. So it has gained a lot of interest already in the very short time that we've been working together.
This is all entirely dependent on you, Nadia, the success of Cabernet Sauvignon Stellenbosch, because this is the last time we've had you on the show. Not only have you moved to a different part of the wine world in terms of Meerlust, but you're also now the chair of the Cabernet Collective, which makes you incredibly important, but also a large Cabernet Sauvignon weight on the shoulders. It is an exciting challenge, and one that has you surrounded by some really, really cool producers. How excited are you about this role and about championing this Cabernet Sauvignon cause?
I think for a long time people looked at me and thought Pinotage, but I've always been a Cabernet girl at heart. I think why I love this position so much is that it has less to do with the variety itself, but it has a lot to do with getting producers from Stellenbosch, high-end wine producers from Stellenbosch, to work together. And there's great opportunity for us to learn from each other, for collaboration, for joint information sharing, and joint marketing exercises. And that just makes us stronger than any individual brand trying to capture a market. And there's been an amazing amount of interest. Both my present role at Meerlust and my previous one at Kanonkop, buyers around the world have started creating slots, retail slots for Stellenbosch Cabernet. Majestic has done one, the UK Wine Society has done one. And I think that speaks to the success and to the belief that they have that Stellenbosch Cabernet is a thing, number one, and can work, number two.
David, you've undoubtedly, purely for points of research, of course, had a glass or two of Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon. I was a big believer that much like a pint of Guinness in Belfast or Dublin tastes better than a pint of Guinness anywhere else in the world. So having a glass of wine, ideally on its estate, but if not, then in the region from which it comes, just somehow lifts the experience entirely. Psychosomatic perhaps, but I subscribe to it nonetheless. What has the Cabernet Sauvignon experience from a drinking, tasting perspective been for you on this trip?
My take on Cabernet Sauvignon thus far, and I'm far and away not an expert yet. I'm now just becoming a Stellenbosch Cabernet enthusiast, and I'll certainly become an advocate when I go back to the United States. But in the conference, we had the opportunity to also taste Stellenbosch Cabernet in the context of other California and Washington Cabernets. These were wines that ranged from US $50 to US $250 per bottle, some very respected bottlings. And the good news is that the three Stellenbosch Cabernets that we tasted all held their own. I think they showed very well in terms of quality, in terms of sophistication. And I think that, as Deidre mentioned, I think one of the most exciting parts of the conference was just seeing 80 or so people in that room sincerely interested in working together to elevate wine quality across the board. And that in itself is really important. The wine regions that I've worked with around the world that have seen success have had a real focus and energy around a variety that they have over decades finally realized is the best match for their terroir and their best opportunity to make wines of substance for the rest of the world. And getting them all to work together, considering all the different kinds of owners and estates and different states of vineyard, it's not an easy thing to do. But there was a real sense of collaboration, a real interest on how to elevate vineyard health, elevate quality and winemaking, and elevate the marketing message with a real focused, concerted effort against Cabernet Sauvignon. And after the tasting, I think we all felt really confident that the wine is there. It's not something that we need to work on for the next several years. It's there, and the quality is there, and it does compare very favorably. Now it's a little bit of how do we make more? How do we improve our vineyards even better? It's a continuous improvement, but it was really exciting to taste the wines. There's a style here that, and a couple of things that I've noticed in the Cabernet Sauvignon that I think is really attractive. One is the aromatics. There's a lot more lighter style aromatics, almost perfume nature to Cabernet Sauvignon that I've noticed, that I've seen pretty consistently. And the other is the acid and fruit. It's a juiciness in the fruit that kind of begs the second glass. Oftentimes you find Napa Valley Cabernets being overly opulent. These are very elegant, and it's actually, I think, a testament to, it's a New World wine region that is heavily influenced by European tradition, but it's great that it has its own identity, its own voice. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think there's very good potential to sell the wine, because it is distinctive.
Well, it's fabulous points and endorsements there, David. It's great to hear such positive feedback from somebody like yourself. You touch on, amongst many things, collaboration. And before I introduce our third guest onto the show, the collaboration, Deidre, that you now have as the head of the collective comes from the winemakers through the region. And I think it is such a huge element of the success of Stellenbosch as a whole, but Cabernet Sauvignon in particular. You've got some really wonderful people, and not just winemakers, but wonderful people who make up this community who, yes, are giving us some terrific work, but by and large, they're also really cool people to hang out with, really nice people to spend time with, and they contribute more than just incredible wine to Stellenbosch.
Yeah, I've had a great opportunity to meet a lot of them over that last couple of days, and I end up tonight at Bry, which I'm very excited about. I just learned how to say that the right way.
You're doing it well.
Thank you. Well. Thank you. I'm working on it. But what a great way to finish a couple of days. Unfortunately, I have to fly back to the United States on Thursday, but I'm already planning to come back for a month next year. I've only been able to scratch the surface, and certainly need to spend more time here. But that's one of the best parts about our industry, is that every year it's different. We grow an agricultural product, and weather changes and circumstance changes. So there's always a new story every year about wine that you just don't see in any other beverage or spirits that are made in the world. And as a consequence, you have people that have great stories to tell, and winemakers are great storytellers. And I've met a number of them thus far, enjoyed a couple of glasses of Cabernet Sauvignon along the way, heard some great stories. So yeah, this is why we love wine. And I think it's why we love to spend time with people that are just as passionate as we are about wine itself.
Well, one of those people for whom passion is writ large across the broad shoulders is winemaker at Oldenburg. Nic, lovely to have you back on the show. Really, really special week for Stellenbosch, headlined with that Cabernet Sauvignon conference. It always seems to be a pretty good time for Stellenbosch, but Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon at the moment, certainly with people like David endorsing it so excitedly and enthusiastically, seems to be ramping up and just better than ever.
Yeah, Dan, it's so good to see all the Cabernet makers standing together in unity. I mean, it's a great variety, and in South Africa, I mean, Cabernet is king in Stellenbosch, and it's just been a good rally to get everybody together, to get everybody working together. I remember years ago, when the Swartland came out and we saw the collaboration between all those winemakers. Stellenbosch, has come together. We're excited about Cab. We're excited about where it can go and what it can do, in the vast valleys where we are. Stellenbosch is such a diverse area, very mountainous, lots of valleys, lots of hilltops, lots of aspects, and a great area to ripen Cab.
Tell me about that diversity of the area. It's one you know well, your previous iteration at Warwick, now sitting in a very different part of Stellenbosch and the Bunhook with Oldenburg. The potential you have just within Stellenbosch to create wines that can be very different from each other depending on which microclimate or ward or region you inhabit is considerable. Where does the balance sit between challenge and opportunity for you as a winemaker in terms of what you're looking to create for a Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon at Oldenburg?
Yeah, with all the different pockets, I mean, in the Bunhook where we are, I mean, we're one of the highest areas in Stellenbosch, so really high above sea level. And, we can also do amazing Cabernet in our area. So it's quite a cool area. And as you know, Cabernet is normally planted in slightly warmer areas. if you compare it to Merlot and Cabernet Franc. And in Bannock, we find that, the type of Cabernet we get is very elegant. It's got a beautiful acidity, being high above sea level. We have this amazing acidity. And we have actually more of a continental climate here, where we have very, very, very cold mornings and moderate days, where the rest of Stellenbosch, if you look at the Oldenburg and the Simmelsburg, quite affected by False Bay and the winds coming in from that side, and then Bottleray area being really warmer, making bigger style Cabernets with more tannin. So there's a style for everybody in Stellenbosch.
The style that you make is one that the Nicol household certainly enjoys considerably, but also one that I feel, as with all of your wines, you have a great deal of fun making and producing, but also that I think you're getting a real feel for as the years unfold in Oldenburg following your move over, with Cabernet Sauvignon in particular. How difficult, how easy is it to get your head around a new space and to get a feel for what's going to be best for the Cabernet Sauvignon that you want to make?
Coming from Warwick, which was one of the warmer properties in Stellenbosch, sitting almost opposite Kanonkorp, on the edge of Stellenbosch and Paarl, and making really big structured wines, moving up the valley and up the mountain to the Bannock, has been quite something I needed to get my head around. It's way cooler, so you have to work quite hard in the vineyards, opening up the canopies just after peaberry stage to get direct sunlight onto the bunches, which helps burn off those pyrazines and those green flavors. We also have quite a lot of vigor in the Bannock, so trying to control vigor has also been a big challenge. But what we've done is we've actually planted fescue, which is a type of a grass which you'll actually find on a golf course on the greens, which then will compete against the vine and bring down the vigor. So it's definitely a different style, a more elegant style, a more fresher style, but amazing style for aging. So and then I think winemakers have also realized that pushing back on extraction, so extracting the variety less, using less new, just really brings out the freshness that Cabernet has to offer. And actually also just picking slightly earlier, not making these big tannic alcohol bombs. So there's been quite a change, and with new clones that are available at the moment, and what we've learned and clean planting material, I see a big future for Stellenbosch Cab.
One very excited winemaker. I suspect there's a very excited chair as well. Deidre, you've had this really important week of looking at where Cabernet Sauvignon is and highlighting the grape and the success of it. I don't think anybody would say that Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon hasn't been successful, because the name of Stellenbosch Cab is well known beyond just our own borders. But I also feel, knowing both you and the winemakers, that you feel there is still potential to do more. What is the sense of the growth that South African Cabernet Sauvignon can take, and what's the direction you'd like to see Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon head in?
I think, so first of all, we've actually a relatively new association. We've been working together only since 2018. And during that time, we spent quite a lot of time sitting together and evaluating what is it that we want to achieve and what would we consider success to look like. So if we look at the plantings of Cabernet Sauvignon in South Africa, the majority of Cab plantings in South Africa sits in Stellenbosch. And Cabernet Sauvignon in Stellenbosch is the most planted red grape variety. So we have a host of winemakers producing the wine, but we also still have a lot of growers growing Cabernet grapes, which are then bought by other sellers. So our first and foremost point of success would be to make sure that we have a good average age of vines, good number of hectares under vine, and not continue to lose hectares under vine for Cab. And also looking at what the average per ton per hectare price is for the growers. Because if we're not going to get people to earn decent money growing Cabernet Sauvignon, they're definitely not going to invest in planting. What we have seen over that time is already a 2,000 to 3,000 Rand increase in price per ton. It isn't nearly enough. but there has already been an improvement. We've also seen improved yields on the number of hectares under vine that we have. So even though we've lost a little bit of ground in terms of hectares, we've lost possibly weaker sites, lesser sites, not producing top quality cab that we're looking for. And the guys that are really behind planting and growing high quality Cabernet have also invested in new technology and equipment and insights as to how to grow Cabernet better, how to yield better yields, and also to make more money off those hectares. So already from a grassroots level, there's been significant improvement. But of course, none of this is possible unless we have increased prices of our wines around the world. So South Africa knows, if you speak to most wine drinkers in South Africa or most top wine collectors or private clients, they're all very much aware of how successful Cabernet or Cabernet-based blends from Stellenbosch are. To name Rubicon or Paul Sauer or Peter Barlow or a number of others, they're the icons of our industry. But how do we get that same level of recognition for these wines outside of our borders? So we've spent some time also identifying possibilities within certain markets for where we could really grow not only the sales of Cabernet from Stellenbosch, but also the reputation. And I think that's why the UK, Hong Kong in the East, and of course the States have been identified as such important markets, because they're big markets for buying and drinking top-end wine, but they're also big sort of shop windows or image perception developer markets for these wines. And that's why they're so key to us.
Well, I know that since the show started 20 minutes ago, just having David on, Cabernet Sauvignon sales in America have already gone up 31%. So we're off to a good start there, Deidre. We've got David's knowledge to tap into. When we look at Napa and we look at Stellenbosch, there are a number of key similarities. One of them is that both areas, to many people, are just kind of one big homogenous grouping. But once you dial down, and both you and Nic have already alluded to it, David, there are subtle differences in the different spaces. In Napa, a Rutherford wine might taste a little different to a wine from Stag's Leap. When it comes to Cabernet Sauvignon, what's your counsel to Stellenbosch producers, to people like Deidre, to producers like Nic, in terms of getting the best out of not just maximizing these differences and the different key attributes that they have, but also translating those into awareness and into the marketing of these wines?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, Dan, and it was a point that we discussed on the conference. There were a lot of questions about should the style evolve to be more attractive potentially to a U.S. palate. And I think unequivocally, based on what I've tasted and the discussions that ensued that afternoon, I think you have to be true to your terroir first and foremost. And I think, as Deidre alluded to, I'd spent time yesterday, in the amount of investment that's going into upgrading vineyards is a testament to how strong the belief is that the unique attributes of Cabernet Sauvignon from Stellenbosch are actually worth augmenting and actually highlighting, as opposed to changing or trying to curtail or evolve the style to hit a certain palate direction. This is a very attractive style of Cabernet. It's a very nice balanced style of Cabernet. I had the chance to taste with Nic yesterday, and as he alluded to, very cool region of the Stellenbosch where Oldenburg is. But the amount of investment and the risk taking that they're taking right now to invest in the future of Cabernet is breathtaking. And I think to make a wine that doesn't speak to that terroir, and he's got a very unique estate to draw from as he gets vine age, would be a shame. In the United States, Cabernet Sauvignon is the #1 selling variety by value. Consumers spend over $3.5 billion a year buying Cabernet Sauvignon. There is plenty of room for different points of view of the grape and nuanced differences in style. And I think that the consumer's already kind of shown that they're willing to try some things that don't taste exactly like Napa Valley. And I think that's an exciting time for the Stellenbosch to start to build that brand awareness that Stellenbosch is a serious Cabernet producer to contend with in the future. And as Deidre alluded to, I think there's a really good opportunity to do that also at much higher prices than what South African Cabernet Sauvignon has traded for in the past. So I think the future is bright, but I would say to any winemaker or anybody working on a vineyard that makes Stellenbosch Cabernet. Don't try to make somebody else's Cabernet.
We look at the change of style in Chardonnay in South Africa from a more Robert Mondavi approved style of years back to a slightly different interpretation now. And I think you speak of something very similar there, David. It does spill into a question that's almost impossible to answer, but I shall ask it anyway. You've got a long and storied history in the wine business and the understanding of the mechanics of it. There are many South African producers, and you've met a load of them already this week, who are delivering terrific wine and would like to see that wine hit an American market. But we know from the statistics we see that people are drinking a little less wine in America, but also have access to even more wine. I'm not sure there's a state in America that's not growing grapes, and most of them are making their own wine. What can South African producers do? And what can our exporters, our distributors do to get a bit more of a foothold, to expose more Americans to a style of Cabernet Sauvignon that does, as you suggest, offer a nice contrast to the slightly bigger Napa style, but that at the moment many of them might just not have heard of?
Well, I think the first step is actually a really powerful one, which is any one wine producer trying to break into the U.S. market, whether they're from South Africa or anywhere else in the world, without having done some work to create the identity of the region and the reasons to believe that the region is an expert in the variety, is facing a very difficult business challenge. So I think the idea of the collective and everybody working together to build a brand and a story around Stellenbosch Cabernet is first and foremost critical. I'd say the second thing is we need to have consumers be provided the opportunity to taste the wines. So instead of pushing the wines into retail shelves where the average consumer might see a bottle of South African wine, a Stellenbosch Cabernet, and not know much about it, and maybe think, well, I'm taking too much of a risk to try something new. Instead, focus on the restaurant opportunity, pouring the wine and ensuring that there's an opportunity to pair it with food. I think the styles of wine that I tasted are eminently much more congruous with some of the styles of food that are frankly starting to evolve in the United States. I think around the world, people are getting healthier. They're eating a little bit different style of cuisine. That cuisine is a much better pairing with wines that have acid and brightness and freshness. So to your point about Chardonnay, and not as much the classic California buttery wooded Chardonnay, but now a Chardonnay that's brighter in fruit and brighter in acid. Very much the same thing in terms of Stellenbosch Cabernet. The fruit tones are higher, the acid is present, the tannins are integrated, much more congruous with U.S. food. And I think it's so critical for people to taste because, as you know, and you alluded to this at the beginning, there's so much language in the way of the consumer making good choices about wine. We make it very difficult as an industry to take risks and try new things. And when we can just get it in the glass and start a conversation, there's usually a lot of good things that result. So I think there's a digital effort, there's a public relations effort to build brand Stellenbosch Cabernet that needs to happen, and there was a good conversation about that at the conference. But also in terms of where to focus time and energy, get the wine in by the glass programs in restaurants so people have the chance to actually experience it. And I think that will start to change hearts and minds, if you will, in the United States about perceptions of Stellenbosch Cabernet and open many more routes to market for many more producers.
I see Deidre is furiously taking notes there and making sure that the agenda for the next Cab Collective meeting is put together. Nic, it's both exciting, but also a bit of work to do. There's clearly, from David's assessment, a quality of wine, a quality of Cabernet Sauvignon in particular, that has a home to be found in America, and there will be people who will enjoy and appreciate and love it. But there is work to be done to get there. How do you feel that we are doing as South African wine as a whole, and maybe more particularly with this Stellenbosch Cab drive in getting wine to markets like America and getting people to understand just what we have to offer?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, I mean, we're standing together as a collective, as Cabernet producers, define a style. And what was interesting when we tasted some of the US cabs with David was that, in the US it's all about opulence and big rich wines. And I think as Stellenbosch we need to decide what what the style is that we're going, and not to try and emulate a Napa style or a US style, or try and make a really soft tannic or a really soft, sweeter, very opulent type of wine, and stand true to what we're about. So I think as members of Stellenbosch Cabernet, I think we'll be doing a lot of benchmark tastings. There's a lot of knowledge sharing between members, just really to make sure that Stellenbosch will stand out in the world stage as a top Cabernet producer. And I'm really looking forward to the journey. Everyone's really excited. There's a lot of research that's going in. We've got the planting material, we've got the sites, so nothing's there that can hold us back.
Having counsel and advice from people like David is invaluable, but so too is the broader space of learning from other producers beyond our own particular spaces. How much time, Nic, do you and your fellow producers spend trying Napa Cab, trying classic cabs and cab blends out of Bordeaux, trying cab from Australia, from other places that are seen as being world-renowned producers, to get an understanding of who's doing what?
Yeah, it's always difficult when you're earning rand, to really get these good examples in. I mean, we were tasting some Napa cabs in the conference, which are $150, $200 plus. But I think we're all pooling together. I belong to quite a few tasting groups. We do taste a lot of Cabernet and Cabernet blends. So it's about just educating ourselves, seeing what's out there. And the great thing about the winemakers of today, all of us are traveling. Everybody tries to do a bit of a study trip. Every time once a year when I go abroad, I try and explore an area of the world where I haven't been before, and for a week I just sit down and taste wines, visit producers, eat the cuisine, and really live the area. And I think as South African winemakers travel, we're getting way more exposure to these foreign wines, and really getting our head around it.
Deidre, you've got, as the Cabernet Sauvignon Collective from Stellenbosch, a pretty clear mandate as to which grape you're going to be championing. But we've had, if I look back over the last 6 months on the show, we've had people from Chenin Blanc, South Africa, and from Cap Classique, South Africa, and from the Sauvignon Blanc Association, and the Pinotage Association, which you in particular know really well. And the Chardonnay Association is about to be relaunched, and the Pinot Noir Association has been having gatherings of late. And all of this speaks to the fact that there is so much that we can do in South Africa and that we can do really well. And I'm sure David has been trying wine beyond just Cabernet Sauvignon and discovering that himself. Where, Deidre, do we sit in terms of what Stellenbosch is looking at? Do you feel that we're starting to nudge towards a more French understanding of these areas are driven and led by particular grapes? Is Cabernet Sauvignon starting to become increasingly the leader of Stellenbosch, and the grape that Stellenbosch as a whole is really looking to focus on from a red perspective?
Well, first of all, Dan, I think one of the challenges about being able to be good at everything, or good at lots of things, which is what South Africa has, is that it's difficult for consumers to understand what it is they should buy from you. And I had a conversation in London not that long ago where a guy came to me and he said, "Oh, South African wines, I'd love to get into it, but I don't quite understand it," which I found quite strange, because I always thought our labeling, our systems was quite simple. It says it's Cabernet, it says it's Stellenbosch. I didn't think there was much left to explain. But what he was just saying is that you guys do everything. So where do I buy what? What do I try from where? And I think that's which makes the Stellenbosch Cab Association different from the Pinotage Association and the Chenin Association, which is obviously running as well, is that we're very specific to the region. So when we're not, I'm not saying we're trying to be exclusive, but we're really focusing on Cabernet from one particular region only, which helps consumers at least find a point of entry that they feel comfortable with. I mean, funnily enough, when David was saying at the conference the other day about how big a category Cabernet is in the States and how big it is in sales in California as well, historically, we've sold the most Cabernet in the US in California. And why is that? Because people at least know the grape variety. So if they wanted to experiment, experimenting with the South African Pinotage or Chenin it's 2 steps away from what they're comfortable with. But they know Cab, they know they like Cab, they know what to expect from Cabernet. So all they have to do is change the region. So it's one slight step out of their comfort zone in terms of experimentation. So it's a good variety to hang our hat on. We have all the proof in the world about terroir and why it works here and why it grows so well. Once again, the history of all the award-winning wines. But I feel that, there is a way that we're simplifying the point of entry into experimenting with Stellenbosch. And I'm not saying Cabernet is the only thing we do well. I mean, a large number of producers make exceptional Chardonnay, for example, and they have a place and they have a reason to exist and to champion the variety too. But you need to give somebody a very simple message that they can know and trust and remember. And then most importantly is when you eventually get them over the line and they say, all right, I'm going to buy a bottle of Stellenbosch Cab. We've got to make very, very sure that that is a really great bottle of wine. Because if it isn't, all the work we've done up until that point is null and void. So we work very closely with the other associations. South African Wine, for example, is called the sort of leadership of all the associations together next week, Wednesday. And we're having a joint think tank as to how we can collaborate within the various associations. So if we're hosting a tasting in the States, for example, and we're showing Stellenbosch Cabernet, there's no reason that we also can't work with the MCC association and show great Stellenbosch sparkling. People don't want to have only one wine. There's not one wine that they're going to drink throughout the night. So there's ways of working together as well. But primarily it's about simplifying the message, simplifying the branding, make it easy for consumers around the world to know one thing. If I want to buy something from Stellenbosch, I'm buying Cab. And if I love the Cab, oh, well, let's try the Merlot. Let's try the Bordeaux blend. Let's try the Chardonnay.
As an expansion on that, David, if we look to Napa, Cabernet Sauvignon is what many people immediately identify the region with, but travel up and down Napa and from the bottom end, you can discover some Pinot Noir. You'll find pockets of old vine Zinfandel. There's Merlot to be found, a bit of Sauvignon Blanc, I think some Albarino somewhere in Napa. There are lots of different grapes. What is your advice to Deidre and her team, seeing how Napa has done it in striking a balance between here is our superstar, but we need the other 10 members of the football team as well to complete the wine community? What's Napa done to get that right that Stellenbosch can take learnings from?
I think first I'd say instead of the other 10 members of the football team, maybe we think about it in terms of rugby sevens. I think as Deidre alluded to, I think the hard part is when you tell people that you do all things well, what you're also saying as a subtext is you don't do any one thing exceptionally well. And I think that's a difficult way to market and to raise prices in any market, because there's an expectation that you meet the hurdle, but you're not necessarily something that's truly special. And having worked on projects around the world, the marketing that made New Zealand synonymous with Sauvignon Blanc, that made Malbec synonymous with Argentina, that made Cabernet synonymous with Napa, these are all things that frankly created an entry point where the consumer believed that the producers had an expertise. I think most people don't buy all of their different wine varieties from one brand. They're usually buying Cabernet from somebody they really think is a great Cabernet producer, and they're going to buy Chardonnay from somebody that's a really great Chardonnay producer. And I think the key is using that signature grape, that perception of expertise, to then invite people to understand there are terroir differences, higher altitude sites for Chardonnay. I tasted Nic makes a beautiful Chardonnay that I think you would want to highlight and introduce people to. But for the global wine community, they need to believe in an expertise in a region, and then they can discover the other varieties. And so you alluded to Napa. Napa did that very successfully. They exported this identity of New World Cabernet Sauvignon. And then there's a lot of great producers of Chardonnay in Napa, and they sell a lot of great Chardonnay as well. So I think it's mostly that idea that no longer are you just a jack of all trades. you're actually a specialist, you're an expert, you are best in class. That starts to give you pricing power so that your export dollars can go up. That allows you to reinvest in quality, reinvest in the vineyard, and then you can slowly introduce the consumer to the fact that there are significant differences from north to south and east to west in Stellenbosch. So it's a fairly large region, so you'd expect that diversity. There's also going to be different styles of Cabernet. There are going to be different styles of Chardonnay, and I think that's what's exciting to anybody as they get into a region. But first, I think they need to believe that you are truly an expert in something.
I think that's a really, really good philosophy to adopt. And Deidre, you've already said as much in terms of what you would like to have happen. If we sit down in 5 years' time, Deidre, and we're looking back at, right, well, David came in, he gave us some terrific advice. Nic chipped in from the producer's perspective. We know where we'd like to be. What if everything goes according to plan? Would we be celebrating 5 years from now in terms of the Stellenbosch Cabernet Collective?
I asked David one of the questions on Monday, if I had to ask you last week, Thursday, before flying out to Stellenbosch, what was your opinion on the region? What was your opinion on its wines? And he said to me, well, he had a great interest to visit here, but in all fairness, he had only tried a handful of wines and he only found 3 Stellenbosch Cabernets in his local high-end wine shop. So first and foremost, availability. Distribution and availability needs to be key. We put a masterclass together a couple of years back in China, in Shanghai, and we couldn't find more than 5 of our members that were actually distributed in China to be able to show. And that in itself is a challenge. If the wine is not available, then nobody's going to try it. You're not going to get any wine in any glasses. So we're working on availability, but that comes from a push and pull perspective. We need to work on increasing demand. So our responsibility primarily is to increase the positioning, the value and the worth of the positioning, to use David's words, positioning of Stellenbosch Cabernet, so that when one of our members approaches a new market or approaches an importer in a new market and says, this is what I do, this is who I am, they already have a positive connotation or context for, oh yes, you're a cab producer from Stellenbosch. I've heard that that's amazing. I'm not sure where, but I know that's a thing I need to have. And if we're successful with that, getting distribution right will be a lot easier. Getting top journalists to come and visit and taste our wines is going to be a lot easier. And of course, then getting the consumer convinced that they're going to buy and drink these wines is going to be a lot easier. It's a tall order, whether we achieve that in 5 years or 15, but as long as I think we move the needle, or we're successful in rolling that boulder a little bit further up the hill, I'd be happy with that too. And there's a couple of great events that we're already putting together. So there's actually a big tasting in Stellenbosch on Thursday as part of Winetown Stellenbosch, where we're doing a tasting called Cab Through the Ages. I think we have about 25 members participating, both with their current vintage and then a 10-year-old or even older vintage of Cabernet. Because to speak to quality Cabernet, you also need to speak to ageability and the ability to buy it, store it, mature it, and to know that you're going to have a better wine in a couple of years to come. So more of that to come to.
So, Deidre, I'm just writing down everything you said there, and I'm just sending it through to all of the Cabernet Collective members. This is what Deidre has promised to do during her tenure as chair of the collective. Nic, there's some really exciting objectives there, lots of bold aims. Is there anything that you would add from a producer perspective, either individually or as a Borg like Cabernet Collective, as to where you would like to be in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I think Deidre said it. I think we've got a lot of hard work to do. We've got a lot of marketing to do. We need to get out there. And, as the Stellenbosch Cabernet slogan goes, Stellenbosch, the other great Cabernet producers. And I would love to, in 10 years' time, when someone refers to, Cabernet and who the great Cabernet producers of the world, they're going to go Napa, they're going to go Coonawarra, and I'd love Stellenbosch to be part of that. So, yeah, it's going to be an exciting time.
It certainly is. David, before we let you go, because you have much wine to taste, particularly if Deidre is delving into her older selection, just some final words for you, summing up your time in South Africa, the enjoyment you've had, and what you feel the potential is for Cabernet Sauvignon for Stellenbosch.
Yeah, I would tell you that I had expectations, as I said, that I'd built up over the years, because this was one of the wine regions I really wanted to visit. I've had the privilege to work in wine regions around the world, helping some of those wine regions actually bring wines to market. And so to finally get here, I can only say that my expectations have been far exceeded. I think the wine quality is exceptional. I think the commitment that I've seen in vineyards is striking. The amount of investment, the amount of really the belief that kind of underlies the willingness to invest in vineyard and understanding site. The wines are fresh, they're bright, they're kind of exciting in a lot of ways in terms of stylistically, the direction they're heading in. I can't wait to come back. I can't wait to see more Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon labels on the shelf. I think the future is very bright, and at the very least, this region and these people that I've met who have so much energy and passion for the wines of Stellenbosch have converted at least this American into an advocate. So I'll do my best to talk to people about Stellenbosch, the Cabernet Sauvignon that I tasted, and why they should be excited to see some of these wines reach our shores. So really fantastic visit, and really dynamic collaboration that I've seen that I think is so important to the success of the region. So can't wait to come back.
So far during the course of the show, you've used the word bry, you've referenced rugby sevens, and you've said some very nice things about Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon. So the wine mayor of Stellenbosch, Councillor Mike Radcliffe, has told me to proclaim you an honorary citizen of Stellenbosch, and we can't wait to welcome you back. I will give you one piece of advice, and because she's now watching this, she's going to have to do this. Once we're done, head down to that Vinotech that they have at Meerlust. Every year on my birthday, David, because I've managed to get hold of a couple of cases of this as an auction years back, I opened a bottle of this. It's the 1978 Meerlust Cabernet Sauvignon, and every single bottle, and I've probably had maybe a dozen of them now, every single one has been an absolute delight. It has aged incredibly. It's retained a remarkable purity of fruit. And in fact, given that both the bottle and myself were a 78 vintage, it's safe to say that the wine has far outstripped me in terms of lasting the distance and still being particularly enjoyable. So do look out for that. Enjoy the rest of the little time you have left in South Africa, but we're looking forward to having you back. And Deidre, thank you, not just for pulling together a really cool show today, but for also the work you have started to do and the more you're going to be doing with the Cabernet Collective in between the day job of drinking vast amounts of Rubicon. Nic, always a delight having you on the show. Thank you for that, and good luck with everything you're doing with Cabernet Sauvignon, amongst the other triumphs that you produce on an annual basis out of Oldenburg. Thank you so much, guys. And David, travel back home safely. I know United brought you out, so a big thank you to them for bringing you out. And United, please bring him back, because we like having David in South Africa. Yes. To all three of you, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Dan, for making this possible and for highlighting our plight. And you'll be pleased to know, so Meerlust turns 50 next year, and as a brand, and we'll be showing some of that 78 cab at a masterclass hosting in London, and shortly after there in New York as well. So maybe we can get David to come down and drink some wine with us in New York and celebrate our 50th birthday.
Sign me up. I'm there.
Exciting times. Well, best of luck for it, Deirdre, and look out for plenty of Meerlust coverage in 2025, celebrating 50 years of a great South African wine. It's not been quite so long for the Cabernet Collective, just 6 years, but already having a real impact on our understanding of Cabernet Sauvignon, our conversations around Cabernet Sauvignon, and in including people like David, ensuring that South African Cabernet Sauvignon, Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon in particular, is talking to people all over the world, and the understanding and appreciating of a really outstanding interpretation of the grape finds a wider audience. And that's a good thing, not just for Stellenbosch, but for South African wine as a whole. That wraps us up for today. A big thank you to the Stellenbosch team, who've had a really, really special week. Thanks to Mike Radcliffe and his team for putting together something incredibly special. We will be back with you on Thursday with the magazine show. Until then, find yourself a bottle of Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon, pop it open, enjoy it with some friends, and sit back and reflect that this is yet another area of South Africa where we're not just great within South Africa, we are absolutely world-class. And if you don't believe me, ask a rather well-known American wine guy. called David. Enjoy the rest of your week. Happy drinking. Goodbye.